Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be doing one final recap from the 45th Chess Olympiad being held in Budapest, Hungary. Now, the players we're going to be focusing on are Ediz Gürel from Turkey, 15 years old, rated over 2,600, and Yagiz Erdoğmuş, who is also very close to 2,600 at the very young age of 13. All right, so first game we're going to take a look at features Ediz playing against Arturs Niksons from Latvia. Now, you may know Arturs Nikson. He is currently the coach of Levi Rosman, also known as Gotham Chess. So this game we're going to look at, let's jump right into the action. So, Ediz playing with the black pieces, Archer's playing with white pieces, and the game starts with the move d4. Ediz plays move knight to f6, we get c4, and now we have the move e6. Now Archers plays knight f3, we get d5, e3, bishop e7, and we get this move b3. Now, the setup is very flexible for white. White wants to move the bishop to either e2 or d3. You also want to put the bishop on this long dark square diagonal. It's a very flexible setup. Levy did actually play this opening quite recently in the New York tournament that he was competing in, so it is pretty standard. We get castles, bishop b2. Now we get the move b6, knight bd2, bishop b7, and here Archers plays bishop d3. Now we get knight bd7, castles, and we get the move c5. And at this point, we're sort of out of the opening phase. Both sides have developed their pieces. White has developed all of D's knights, the two B's. Black also has developed the B's, developed the knights, and castled the king out of the center. So, pretty textbook opening so far, with players having developed their pieces, and now the middle game struggle ensues. Niksons plays rook c1, we get rook c8, and here we have the move queen e2 being played. What Niksons wants to do is play rook d1 here, and long term, once you get the rook on d1, here you can maybe take on c5 with both of these diagonals open, the two rooks on the c and the d files here. White should be a little bit better. Now, Ediz plays move rook c7 here, and this shows really good understanding. And one thing that I will say about juniors is that I've actually played a lot of these kids online in recent years. And if I go back to, say, 2016, 2017, maybe even 2018, a lot of these kids, if I played an opening like what Archers Niksons has played in this game, they would not have a clue what to do. Now, obviously, the playing field has been leveled a lot with things like Chessable, as well as simply the online content that's available. But it is amazing to see kids know stuff even in positions which are not standard theory. So we get the move a3. Ediz plays queen to a8 here, and this is a great move from him. He's trying to put the queen and the bishop on a super long diagonal. He can also stack the rooks on c8 just to get perfect harmony. Rooks on the c file, queen and bishop on the diagonal, and black is doing very well. So Archers Niksons decides to take on d5. We get the move knight takes pawn, and here we have the move knight e5 being played. Now, after knight to e5 is played, Ediz plays knight 5 to f6, and this is another move that I really like here because now he opens up the long diagonal for the queen and the bishop. Additionally, now if white takes on d7 here, you can take with the rook, and there's pressure on d4 as well. And this is a really nice move. It also stops white from ever playing queen to h5, trying to threaten checkmate on h7. So we get knight to f6. Archers plays f3, and now we get the move rook fc8, and Ediz has achieved the optimal setup here. Rooks on the c file, the queen and the bishop lined up, and white also has a slight issue with his weakness on d4 potentially down the road. So we get knight takes knight. Here we get knight takes knight, another good move being played by Ediz. Now that this diagonal is closed and there is no queen h5, black would really like to put the bishop on f6 here and pressure the pawn on d4 and the bishop on b2 as well. So we get the move d takes c5. Ediz takes with the knight, and now we get bishop to c4, and here we have the move bishop d5 being played. Now, it's still pretty solid. Neither side has a big advantage, but if anybody is better, it should be black due to having the rooks on the c file being stacked. It is really the only open file in this position which can be contested, and on top of that, white has a slight weakness on b3 and a weakness on a3 as well. So Niksons goes rook fd1. We get the move h6 being played, a nice move to create the classic lift for the king and avoid any ice skater checkmates. Niksons goes b4. Now we get the move bishop takes bishop, rook takes, and we get the move knight to a4. And at this point, it's starting to get a little bit dangerous here. The bishop on b2 is weak. The knight is trying to jump back towards the center, and black is going to control the open c file. Niksons plays bishop d4, and now we get the move rook takes rook, knight takes, and here we have the move queen d5 being played. Niksons plays knight to e5, and now we get to move queen b3, and at this point, it's very clear that Niksons is struggling because both these pawns on a3 and b4 are weak. There's rook c2 to create the kebab on the second rank, and white is in a lot of trouble. So, Niksons plays move queen to d3. Now, the computer gives rook to d3 here, and I guess after rook c1, king f2, queen b1, and king g3, typical computer move, by the way, White is apparently still in the game, but moving your king to f2 and g3, I'm going to be honest, is simply not very human. And at this level, which is a little bit below the elite level, never going to happen in a million years. So Archers plays queen d3, and now we got to move knight c3 being played here by Ediz Gürel. And now white has all kinds of issues. The pawn on a3 is weak. The pawn on b4 is weak. If you take on c3, now I can take with the rook, and e3 even is weak. All of the white pawns are falling off the board here, and white is close to loss. So we got to move rook d2 instead. Worth pointing out, by the way, rook c1 trying to pin the horse would not work, because now there's knight to e2 check, creating the fossil and the fork. White takes. You win the rook on c1, and after king f2, rook c2, now you lose the queen on e2, and it's GG, why not? So we get the move rook to d2 being played, and now Ediz takes the pawn on a3. Both the pawns on a3 and b4 are collapsing. Unless white can create a quick strike towards the king side here, technically speaking, this should be pretty easy to convert. So we got to move rook c2. Now we have bishop takes pawn being played, and even though there's a pin towards the rook, with the queen, the bishop, and the rook all guarding the knight, now black just needs to start pushing p on the queen side to win the game. We get knight c4, queen a1 is played, and now Nixons goes king f2, and here we get to move queen to a6. And at this point, Archer's Nixons just resigns rather abruptly because there's nothing he can do. Now, if white were to move this knight, which is the logical idea to avoid losing it, black will trade the queens and go knight to e4 check, creating the fossil. After takes, rook c2, king f3, and bishop f8. Black has two outside pawns to push up the board. Very, very clean position here. Very, very clean win. So, if white in this position plays another move, let's just say knight to b2, it's the same thing, trade knight e4. And if you play the move that also exists, which is bishop takes knight, now black will play queen takes knight here. And if you move the queen away, I win the b. And if you trade the queens after rook c4, now the pin is deadly. If you take the bishop, I win the rook. And then I just start pushing the pawns. And if you play the move, let's just say rook a2, I'll take the bishop. And after bishop c5, winning the pawn on e3, as well as having a wooden shield here, this should be quite easy to win. So, after queen a6, Archer's Nixons resigns this game. Now, I'm only covering one game of Ediz and one game of Yagiz Erdoğmuş, so I will highlight. With this win, Ediz would pick up some rating points. He would actually end the event with a score of 9 points out of 11 on board 2. This was a 27.55 performance rating. Now, he would not get the gold medal. There's a player, I believe, from the Czech Republic who also went 9 out of 11 and had a higher tournament performance rating. But nonetheless, Ediz Gürel, who is only 15 years old, puts up a tremendous score on board 2. One of the best out there, and it's very, very impressive. So, you might also be thinking, well, look at these kids. Like, where are they coming from? Now, Turkey is a country that traditionally does not have a really strong chess culture. We've been talking about this a lot in recent times. But there are these kids who are blossoming. They're playing a lot online. They're getting these opportunities in these tournaments, whether it's the World Cup, whether it's playing events like the Olympiad. And so it's great to see these kids and to see the improvement, considering what it feels like is not a great chess history in some of these countries. Now, I'm not trying to say that to be rude. Some people might take it that way. But it just shows that anywhere in the world, kids who have access to the right resources can become very good at chess. All right, so this is the first game we take a look at. Very, very impressive win by Ediz Gürel, 15 years old. And now we're going to move to a game being played in round number 10 between Kasper Pierun from Poland and Yagiz Erdoğmuş. Now, in my last Olympiad, which I did compete in 2018 in Batumi, Georgia, I did lose a very critical game to Kasper Pierun in the US-Poland match, which did cost us dearly in terms of trying to compete for the medals. So he is a player who should not be underestimated. Now, Yagiz Erdoğmuş, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, so I apologize to all the Turkish fans out there. He is a kid who needs no introduction. He is someone that I played against, I would say probably like 6 to 9 months ago under the username Legend is back on chess.com. I'd never heard of him. Very, very sharp tactics, and his rating has gapped tremendously. He is now on the brink of setting history with a rating of 2592 at 13 years old. If he does finish this Olympiad very well, he will catapult himself over 2600 and set history. All right, so let's jump right into the action. Game starts out with knight f3. We get to move d5 from Erdoğmuş. We get g3, and now we have knight f6, bishop g2, and here we get the move e6. We get castles, bishop e7, and now we have move c4, castles, and d4. Now this via transposition is the classic Catalan system here. White has put the knight on f3, he's fianchettoed the bishop to g2, and he's pushed the pawns to d4 and c4. So Erdoğmuş plays c6. Now we get to move knight to c3, and here we have the move a5 being played. What Erdoğmuş is trying to do here is create some space on the queen side, maybe go b5 later, maybe b6 and bishop a6. But in general, when you play a5, white doesn't really have the opportunity to play a3 and b4 in this position. We get the move b3, trying to guard the pawn on c4. We get b6, And after bishop b2, we have the move bishop a6. Now, just to point out why this makes so much sense, if you were to play b6 and white gets some position, I'm just going to set it up like this. If white gets b4 here, the idea is like b5 to play on the diagonal. And that's why a5 is so effective, because it really does stop white from ever being able to expand here. And then in this position after bishop a6, now the bishop is very safe on this long diagonal, spying the pawns on c4 and e2. So Hikaru plays knight d2. We got the move b5 being played here. A very nice move, because when you look at the position conceptually, the bishop is actually a little bit passive here on the diagonal. White is guarding the pawn on c4. So when you play b5, what you're intending to do is after Hikaru plays c5 and knight bd7, later on you're intending to play b4 here and open up the scope. Now, if white could get the pawn to b4 here, this bishop on a6 is a very crummy piece. The pawns are in the way here. There simply is nowhere to activate. I'm just going to put the knight on b8 even. Even if you get bishop c8, you still need e5 here. This bishop is just walled in by all these pawns, and it's very, very badly placed. But in this position after knight bd7, black is going to be able to play b4 here to open up the scope, and therefore black is not actually doing all that badly. So here we got the move rook to e1. Now Erdoğmuş plays e5 here. A nice move trying to go after the white center with the pawns on c5 and d4. And Hikaru plays move e3. Now we get the move b4 here, opening up this long diagonal for the light square b. And the move knight a4 is played. Here we get this move e4 being played by Yagiz, Kaan, Erdoğmuş. And this shows really, really good understanding here, because now when you look at the position, this light square b for black is on a very nice open diagonal. But now the white b is actually staring at a chain of 3, this wall of pawns here, and the bishop on g2 is not doing a whole lot. So Hikaru plays f3, logical move here, trying to rip open this diagonal in the long term to activate the light square b. And now we get the move bishop d3. Now this move as well, great move to stop e4 here. If white plays e4, you can simply take, and after takes, you've won a pawn in the center of the board, and you still have the connect 3 and a bastion with the knight on e4. So Hikaru plays the move queen f4. Now we get the move rook to e8, and here we have this move a3 being played. Now this is a very strange move. I don't really know why Hikaru played this move. Perhaps he thought e4 wasn't working, but in this position, the computer is screaming for the move e4 here to try and open up this diagonal. Also because with the rook, the knight, and the bishop here, if black gets time and can say, let's just say gets the bishop to f8 and e4 is not possible here, or let's just say you get something like this even, black is just winning here, just completely winning in this position, because after takes, eventually you're going to get a bastion with the knight coming to e4, just to illustrate the point. Something like this, and black with this bastion is doing very well. White can get a bastion on b6, by the way, but the knight simply has no squares available here. c4 is covered, the knight can't jump to d7 or c8, and black will just shift everything over to the king side and win the game. So the computer's screaming for e4 here. Probably Hikaru thought after takes, knight e4, takes, bishop g5, he'd be in all kinds of trouble. You have the rook and the b attacking this bishop. The bishop and the queen coordinate to attack the white queen. But after queen to f3, takes, knight f6, and a move like rook e5, knight d5, and rook a e1. Black is a little bit better here. Make no mistake about it, but it's not all that special, primarily because down the road, not h6, sorry. Let's say I go rook f8, for example. If white can play knight b6 here, suddenly this diagonal is opening for the queen. Is the knight on d5 not a pawn? If you move the rook, I take, and I win the game. And after knight takes b6 takes, you can go bishop f6 here. But after a move like rook f5, takes, and queen to e3. Black is marginally better in this rook and pawn endgame, but you have the weak pawn on a5, the rook is coming to e7, and white should draw this very comfortably. So it's a bit of a shame from the Polish standpoint to see the move a3 on the board, but this is what we get. Here, Erdoğmuş plays h5, and this, by the way, is the absolute best move according to the computer, and it's because there's a very sneaky idea behind this move. Now, first of all, it creates a classic Lufthansa for the king. The king can run to, or Luft, I should say. The king can run to h7. No ice skater checkmate, similar to the Ediz Gürel game we looked at just a minute ago. But additionally, there's something very nasty, which is that if white plays this move e4 here in this position, there's potentially something like knight to g, actually not e4, sorry, wrong one. Let's just say white were to play rook a2. You can play knight to g4 here, followed by bishop to g5, and all of a sudden, it's a big uh-oh spaghetti-o moment. The knight, the bishop, the rook, everything is coordinated, and white loses the game. Now, white still could play e4, by the way, which is possible. It was not played in the game. But if white goes to e4 here, I think it's quite different. After takes, bishop e4, bishop g5, queen f3. Now I think after takes, there's something wrong. Is it h4? Peter wants takes, bishop a3, and I guess rook b8 is winning. I don't actually know why the pawn being on h5 makes a huge difference, but the computer does give it as close to -2. So in this position, we have to move A takes B4 being played, and now we have to move pawn takes pawn, and here we get E4. Now, white has traded the pawns on B4 here. Probably thinking, well, with the pawns trade on B4, maybe it's favorable for white, but as we're about to see, it's not very good. We got takes, knight takes, takes, takes. Now we get to move bishop G5, queen to F3 is played. We got the trade, and now we have to move knight F6. Now, the reason this is actually much worse than the other version is that now white is kind of stuck here. The pawn on B3 is a weakness later on. The knight can't really jump to B6 here. And your pawns in the center of the board are serious weaknesses. On top of that, your king is a little bit weak as well. So all the trumps in the position are in favor of Yagiz, Kaan, Erdoğmuş. So we got the trade of the rooks. Now we get to move rook to F1. And here we have to move bishop E3 check being played. King H1. And now we got to move queen E6. Now this is exactly why trading on B4 was not best. Because the pawn on B3 is hanging. You're actually really struggling to guard this pawn in this position because the bishop cuts off the queen from guarding it. If you were to play a move like queen to D1, for example, I think after knight E4, there's knight F2, there's knight D2, all kinds of forks of bound in the position. Your king is also on a very, very bad diagonal as well, and so white is completely lost. So Casper Pieroon plays knight B6. Now we get to move rook to A2, and this also highlights why white should not have traded the pawns, because now the rook is coming in on the open A file. We've got a kebab in the second rank, and we got to move knight C4. Now, knight does temporarily guard the bishop and attack black B. Black can't actually take on D4 right away because the bishop guards, so white is hanging on by the thinnest of threads. Now, here Erdoğmuş plays the brutal move queen to H3, and this is a brilliant move. It's double X-slam move according to the engine, and this pretty much ends the game on the spot. Now, the reason this move is so strong is that in this position, if white takes with the knight, after rook B2, there's the threat of mate on H2, and when you go rook to F2, I can simply trade the rooks on F2. Actually, wait, sorry, one second. Is this correct? I was about to say I felt like there's something better. No, I think after rook F2, you can even go rook B3. Actually, it's just rook B3. I'm blind. Not rook takes F2. You go rook B3, pinning the knight. Black is an extra B pawn, which is racing up the board. Rook F1 is still in play, and it's just totally hopeless. So, if white were to play the move queen takes E3, then you sack the rook, but you lose the game. After queen F1, queen G1, probably 20 ways to win, but check and queen B3 is simplest as the knight, the bishop, everything is simply collapsing here, and white will lose in a few moves. So, Casper Pieroon plays rook to A1. We get knight G4 being played. A nice move threatening the checkmate on H2 now. So, even though black is sacking the rook, if white takes, queen takes H2 is GG on the spot. So, here Pieroon plays queen G2. Now we get to move knight to F2, king G1, and now we get this move knight to E4 being played. Now, this is a mistake from Erdoğmuş. What he should have played here was probably the move knight to D3. Not knight to D3, sorry. He should have played the move, or rook takes B2 was the correct order, wrong sequence. Sacking the rook, because if you were to play knight D3, I just remembered white can take on E3 here, and now we're in a regular endgame. So after you sack the rook, if white trades the queens, you're simply up a bishop here in this position. And if white plays the move knight takes rook, now you can play the move knight to D3 check. Very important, by the way. That's why you have to change the order. Because remember, knight D3, white can take the bishop. So when you play rook B2, takes, and knight D3 check, white moves the king. You trade the queens. Actually, you don't trade the queens. Sorry. Wait a second. I've got to think for a second. This is losing, but why? Maybe you just move the queen? Maybe that's not right. Maybe there's another way. Maybe my analysis is not great. Computer says queen G4. Apparently, it's the winning move. A little bit dank action where I look at it, so I'm not too surprised that Erdoğmuş didn't go for this. But at any rate, black is winning. So we get knight E4 instead. Now we have knight takes bishop, takes, rook B2. But one important thing about this endgame here is that black is in no risk of losing. Even though black might have misplayed this very slightly, there's no danger whatsoever. So we get the move king to F3 being played. Erdoğmuş goes knight D2, king F4, and now we get to move rook takes pawn on B3. And here black simply is the extra B pawn, but more importantly, on top of having this pass pawn, there's another very dangerous threat, which is that let's say white plays H3. You go G5 here, checking the king. King cannot go to F3 or E4. The squares are covered by the knight. After takes and rook E3, black is up a horse with this pass pawn going to B2 and B1, pushing P. Black just wins. So Pieroon plays rook A8. We get king H7. Now we get to move D5 being played. This is simply desperation here. White trying to push the pawn through, create a pass pawn, either the C or D pawn, push that P up the board. Unfortunately, the pawns are a little bit too slow, as we'll see, because Erdoğmuş does play G5 here. We get king F5, rook takes E3, and now we have the move D takes C6. Now, on first glance, you might be thinking, wait, this pawn is going through. You're going to get C7, C8. You're going to queen. Unfortunately, because the king is on F5, black can play this very cold-blooded move, rook to C3 here. And now if you push the pawn, I take with check, and then I take C7. No pawns left on the board, and the knight and the pawn simply win the game. So Pirun goes rook to a5 here, trying to guard the pawn and still threatening to play c7 and c8. And now Erdoğmuş plays the move b3, a very nice, simple move here, because when both sides queen the pawns here, the queen on b, when the pawn promotes on b1, it will become a check, and white's king will be mated. So Pirun plays rook b5, we get b2 here. Now we get rook takes pawn, rook takes c5, king f6. Here we get rook takes c6. Not the only way to win, by the way, but it's one of the simplest. We get takes, king g5. Now we get the move knight to f3 here, and Pirun plays king f5. Now, if Pirun were to capture this pawn on h5 here, there are many ways to win, but probably the simplest is to go rook to g6 here, threatening this very unusual Arabian checkmate here. If you move the rook, I get rook g5 here. King has no squares available as the knight and the rook combine to mate the king. And if you play the move h4 here to try and stop it, now I can simply play this move knight to d4. And if white were to play a move like, let's just say rook f2, for example, there's knight to e6 here. And again, knight g7 is a checkmate. If you take, I check, takes. And with the rook versus the two pawns, it's very elementary. And last but not least, if white were to go g4 in this position, now you can play knight e6, g5, and you have another very nasty move, pawn to f5 here, threatening two mates with knight g7 and knight f4. And if white plays end peasant, knight f4 is checkmate. And if white goes rook to b7, now you check, and after takes, it's very, very important. You do not play king takes rook, because this would be stalemate. King has no squares available, and the game ends in a draw. But after rook takes rook, g6, and king to h8, again, takes would be stalemate as well. After king h8, king g5, f4, white pushes, the pawn gets through. If white takes, you take, and with the rook versus the pawn, very simple win here for black. So therefore, Pirun plays move king to f5 instead, and now we get to move king g7. Here we have h4, and the move rook g6. Now, rook g6, nice technical move here, attacking the pawn. White's pawns are kind of fixed on g3 and h4. Pirun goes king f4. We get knight to d4. And at this point, Pirun resigns in this position against Yagiz, Kaan, Erdoğmuş. In view of the fact that, let's say you go rook g2, there's rook g4, king e5, and there are many ways to win, but simplest is a check and go knight f5 here. Eventually, the pawns on g3 and h4 are going to fall. Black is not going to lose either of the pawns on f6 and h5, so it's all but hopeless. So, with this win, and I should set up the final position. With this win, after knight d4, Yagiz, Kaan, Erdoğmuş ensures that at the end of this 45th Chess Olympiad, he is going to be rated over 2,600. He's going to set history as the youngest person to ever achieve this landmark rating. His performance overall was 8 out of 11, a very stellar performance. I don't think it was good enough to finish on the podium, but he scores 8 out of 11, has a 26-36 tournament performance rating, and he does very well in this event. So, it's really, really great to see juniors from all over the world in many of these countries that don't have heralded chess histories doing well. You have countries like Iran, Turkey. I mean, obviously, we can talk about India or Uzbekistan, which are at the forefront of the revolution. But in general, it's really, really great to see all these juniors who are doing so well. And I thought it would make for one final nice recap to talk about some of the other juniors, because the juniors are starting to take over chess. All right. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap, or the final recap, I should say, from the 45th Chess Olympiad in Budapest, Hungary. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps. A lot of big chess tournaments coming up in the near future, so I hope you guys have enjoyed all these recaps from the Olympiad. I'll see you very soon. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.